You never really think about how much your home means to you until someone tries to destroy a part of it. For me, that moment came on a quiet Saturday morning. I walked out into the yard with a cup of coffee in hand, expecting to enjoy the fresh air. But what I saw instead made my heart sink. My fence, the one I had spent months saving up for, carefully measuring, painting, and securing, had been vandalized overnight. Spray paint covered the boards in ugly, chaotic patterns, words I won't repeat, and strange markings that looked more like symbols than random graffiti. At first, I thought it was just some kids messing around, maybe a prank, but something about it felt off. The way the paint was applied, the choice of symbols, even the parts of the fence they chose to hit. It wasn't random. It felt deliberate, and it made me uneasy. Now, if you've never had your property vandalized, it's hard to explain the mix of emotions. It's not just anger. It's not just frustration. It's something deeper. It feels like someone violated your space, crossed a line that should never be crossed. That fence wasn't just wood and paint to me. It was a boundary, a part of my family's security, a marker of the life we built. Seeing it destroyed like that stirred something inside me, and I knew I couldn't just ignore it. Most people in my situation would probably call the police and file a report. But I had something. Most people don't. I had my wife. She isn't just detail-oriented or observant. She's a professional forensic analyst. While I stood there staring at the damage in shock, she stepped forward, eyes narrowing in focus the way they do when she's at work, scanning the scene, like it was a crime scene in one of her cases. She didn't even speak for the first few minutes, just looked, walked slowly along the fence, studied the markings, the angle of the spray paint, even the drips where the can had been pressed too hard. To me, it was vandalism. To her, it was evidence. I remember her saying something that immediately sent chills down my spine. She said, "This wasn't random. Whoever did this wanted to send a message." At that moment, I realized we weren't just dealing with bored teenagers looking for fun. There was something more sinister happening here. Of course, I wanted to know who and why. Was it a neighbor with a grudge? Was it someone targeting us specifically? My wife's experience kicked in right away. She started pointing out details I never would have noticed. The paint wasn't cheap store-brand spray paint. It was industrial grade, the kind used for marking construction sites. That meant whoever did it had access to specific materials. The symbols weren't random either. They resembled gang markings, but she noted they were mixed with numbers, almost like a code. She took pictures of everything, every angle, every smear, even the footprints in the dirt near the fence. She crouched down, studying the shoe prints, pointing out the sole patterns, the depth of the impressions, and even estimating the person's weight by the way the ground had compressed. I was amazed, but also unsettled. This wasn't just someone messing around. This was planned, intentional, and now it felt personal. The more she explained, the more nervous I became. I started asking questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. Who would target us? Why would they use symbols like this? Was it some kind of warning? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just kept working, treating our yard like a laboratory. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried a seriousness that made my stomach turn. She said, "I think they'll be back." Those words stuck with me. The idea that this wasn't a one-time thing, that whoever had done this might return, left me restless. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside, every shadow, every movement of the trees felt like it could be them, coming back to finish what they started. My wife, on the other hand, stayed calm. She spent the evening reviewing the photos she had taken, enlarging them, enhancing details on her computer, and even running comparisons through her forensic software. Watching her work gave me a strange mix of comfort and fear. Comfort, because I trusted her skills more than anyone. Fear, because if she was taking this seriously, it meant we were dealing with something real. The next day, she shared her findings with me. The symbols on the fence weren't just random graffiti. They matched markings used by a small but known group in the area that had been linked to property crimes and intimidation tactics. They weren't a large gang, more like an underground circle, but they were organized enough to leave their mark in coded symbols. According to her, the fact that they hit our fence could mean one of two things. Either we were chosen randomly as an easy target, or someone in that group wanted to send us a direct message. Neither option made me feel safe. She also discovered something else, something chilling. Among the symbols was a very specific marking that didn't belong to the E group at all. It was like a signature, a calling card of one particular individual. This detail, she said, might actually be more important than the rest, because it suggested a personal motive. Whoever this was, they wanted us to know it was them. I couldn't help but ask, why us? That question echoed in my mind again and again. We weren't rich. We weren't flashy. We didn't have enemies, at least none that I knew of. But the look on her face told me she was already piecing together possible answers, running through connections and past cases in her mind. Her prediction about them coming back soon turned out to be right. Just a few days later, we found new damage. This time, it wasn't just paint. Sections of the fence had been slashed with something sharp, leaving deep gouges in the wood. And there was another marking, fresh, almost taunting us. That night, my wife stayed up late again, analyzing the new evidence. She told me something that made my blood run cold. The new marking wasn't just random, it was escalating. Whoever was doing this was getting bolder, more aggressive, and more determined to make us notice. This wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about us. The fear was real, but so was the determination. My wife wasn't about to let someone intimidate us, not when she had the skills to fight back. She started planning, setting up discreet cameras, documenting every detail, and building a case the way she would for any client. Only this time, the case was personal. For me, the whole situation felt like being trapped in a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. But for her, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved, and she was determined to solve it. Watching her work gave me hope, even though I knew the danger was growing. And deep down, I realized something important. Whoever vandalized our fence might have thought they picked the wrong house to mess with, but in reality they picked the absolute worst one, because my wife wasn't just any homeowner. She was a forensic analyst, and she was about to turn their game upside down. The aftermath of the arrest was supposed to bring peace, but in truth, it only uncovered more layers of the story. The young man who had been caught wasn't just acting alone, and he wasn't just reckless. He was part of something bigger, something simmering beneath the surface of our quiet neighborhood. My wife, sharp as ever, saw it immediately. The police revealed that the suspect had ties to a small but troublesome group, one that had been tagged in other vandalism cases across the city. They weren't just kids being reckless. They thrived on intimidation, leaving behind strange marks and cryptic symbols like calling cards. And targeting us, targeting my wife, was no accident. It was an attempt to prove something to their peers. But what they hadn't counted on was her being the kind of woman who could unravel every careless mistake they made. The night after the arrest, our home was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. The fence still stood damaged, the boards scarred with ugly spray paint, almost like a reminder of what we had gone through. I thought of fixing it immediately, but my wife stopped me. She said, "Let it stay a little longer. This fence tells a story. Every scar on it is evidence of their failure." And she was right. Word spread through the neighborhood quickly. Neighbors who had been quiet before now came forward, saying they had experienced strange things too. Trash scattered across lawns, cars scratched, and suspicious figures walking through alleys late at night. Suddenly, our story wasn't just our own. It was everyone's. My wife became a quiet hero on our street. the forensic analyst who turned a terrifying act into a case that exposed a dangerous group. But the story didn't end with one arrest. A week later, the police uncovered 2 more. Members of the group after tracing DNA links from the evidence my wife had gathered. Her fingerprints were all over the case, not in the literal sense, but in how thoroughly she had documented every detail. Even the smallest thing, like the angle of a footprint or the chemical makeup of spray paint, became part of the chain that brought more culprits down. And then came the moment I will never forget. One evening, just as the sun was setting and casting, a golden glow across the broken fence, my wife and I sat on the porch. She held a folder thick with case notes, photos, and lab reports, the story of what had happened to us. She looked at me and said, "You know, they thought they were making us weaker. But what they did was make us stronger. They gave us a chance to stand together, to show them that fear doesn't win." That statement stuck with me, because it wasn't just about us. It was about every person who has ever been targeted, intimidated, or pushed around. What happened at our fence became more than vandalism. It became proof that with knowledge, courage, and persistence, even ordinary people can fight back against intimidation. In the days that followed, I noticed something changing in myself too. Before this, I had seen crime as something far away, something handled by professionals. But watching my wife at work, watching how she pieced together a puzzle, with patience and precision, made me realize that the truth is often within reach. It's not about having power in the loudest sense. It's about having the courage to look closer, to question, to refuse to be silenced. And then came closure. The group was officially disbanded by law enforcement. The young man who had vandalized our fence was sentenced, his arrogance replaced by shame when confronted with the undeniable evidence against him. The fence, once a symbol of their attempt to frighten us, now stood as a monument of resilience. We eventually repaired it, replacing the slashed boards with fresh, strong wood, but we kept one of the damaged planks. My wife framed it, like a trophy of a battle won. The most powerful moment of all came during a conversation with one of our neighbors. She told me, "We all feel safer because of what your wife did. She didn't just protect your fence, she protected all of us." Hearing that made me realize the impact had spread far beyond our yard. My wife hadn't just solved a case. She had restored a sense of security to our entire block. And as I tell this story now, I keep thinking about the irony. They tried to send us a message with fear, but the real message was written in the evidence they left behind. Every mistake, every careless move, every piece of DNA, every scar on that wood, they told us exactly who they were. And my wife, with her brilliance and unshakable will, listened carefully until their story was exposed. This entire ordeal taught me something important, something I think everyone should remember. Evil often looks bigger than it really is. Intimidation feels louder than truth, but the moment you shine a light on it, the shadows disappear. My wife reminded me of that, not just with her profession, but with her determination as my partner, as someone who refused to let fear define us. In the end, justice wasn't just about catching the culprits. Justice was about reclaiming our peace, about knowing that no matter how dark the night, there's always a way to fight back, with truth, with courage, and with evidence that speaks louder than fear. So if you've listened this far, I want you to take one lesson from our story. Never underestimate what you're capable of, and never underestimate the quiet strength of the people around you. Because sometimes, the ones who seem calmest, who work in the background, are the very people who can change everything when it matters most. And for me, that person is my wife. They vandalized our fence. They thought they could shake us. But they forgot one thing. My wife is a forensic analyst, and she doesn't lose. The second act of this ordeal started the moment we realized the vandalism wasn't just an isolated attack, but something that was escalating. After the slashes appeared on the fence, I knew fear would only give them more power. My wife reminded me of that constantly. She said, "Fear is exactly what they want, but evidence is what we'll use." And she meant it. That night, instead of calling more relatives or talking to neighbors, she laid out a plan. She placed motion detecting cameras near the fence line, hidden where no one would expect them. She collected wood samples from the slashed planks, analyzing the depth and angles of the cuts, explaining to me how the blade was sharp but inconsistent, meaning it was probably a worn utility knife. She even pointed out the slight curve in one of the cuts, indicating the attacker's hand shook slightly, or they weren't as skilled with the tool as they wanted us to believe. To me, these were just lines on wood. To her, they were the fingerprints of behavior. I'll never forget her words that evening. Every criminal leaves a trace no matter how careful they think they are. That became our anchor as the tension grew. The following morning, she expanded her investigation. She walked the perimeter of our yard, scanning the ground, the bushes, the alley behind our home. She found cigarette butts near the fence line, still fresh. She collected them carefully with gloves, sealing them in evidence bags like she would on the job. She found boot marks leading away from the alley, pointing toward the side street. She even noticed the faint smell of spray paint lingering in the air, which suggested the vandal wasn't just passing by, but had been hanging around longer than we thought. Her level of detail was astonishing. Where I saw chaos, she saw a story, being told piece by piece. And that story was beginning to reveal a pattern. That evening, she went through the footage from the cameras. At first, there was nothing. Just stray cats, the occasional neighbor walking by, cars passing. But around 2:30 in the morning, the footage caught something. A tall figure in a hoodie, standing near the fence, head darting around nervously before, leaning in and scratching at the wood with what looked like a knife. It was grainy, the face wasn't visible, but the body language was unmistakable. This wasn't random. This was someone with intent. She froze the frame and studied it for several minutes, pointing out details I hadn't even considered. The person was left-handed. Judging by the way they held the can and the knife, their posture suggested they were young, maybe in their 20s, and the slight drag in their right leg hinted at an old injury. I stared at her in disbelief as she rattled off these observations, but she wasn't speculating. She was analyzing. At this point, I thought it was time to hand everything over to the police, but my wife shook her head. She knew from experience that unless there was a suspect or clear evidence of danger, a property crime like this might not get the urgency it deserved. She wanted to build something undeniable, something they couldn't ignore. As days passed, the tension in our home grew. Every creak of the house at night made me sit up. Every bark of the dog had me rushing to the window. But my wife stayed steady, almost energized by the chase. She spent her evenings running the cigarette butts for DNA swabs, using connections at her lab, cross-referencing the symbols with known criminal databases, and even mapping out the times the vandal struck. She noticed something remarkable. The attacks weren't random nights. They followed a pattern. Every third night, between 2 and 3 a.m. That meant whoever it was had a schedule, maybe even a reason tied to those specific times. By the time the fourth incident happened, we were ready. The vandal returned, just as she predicted. But this time, the cameras captured a clearer shot. The hood slipped slightly as the person turned, and although the face wasn't fully visible, we caught enough to see a jawline, a patch of facial hair, and most importantly, a distinct scar running along the left side of his cheek. My wife's eyes lit up when she saw it. To her, that scar was as good as a signature, but it wasn't just the face. That night, the vandal left behind something even more telling. In their hurry, they dropped a glove near the fence. My wife picked it up the next morning with her evidence gloves, holding it like she had just struck gold. She examined the fabric, noting the wear and tear, the faint trace of paint inside the fibers, and the size. "This is going to tell us more than he ever wanted us to know," she said confidently. Her analysis revealed fingerprints on the inner lining of the glove. That, combined with the DNA from the cigarette butts, meant we had biological evidence strong enough to connect someone directly. She ran the samples through her contacts in law enforcement, and within a few days we had a match. The name that came back shocked us both. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random criminal. It was a neighbor's relative, someone who had been seen around the block before, always hanging back, always quiet. The pieces started falling into place quickly after that. This young man had a record: petty theft, trespassing, even previous vandalism. But what stood out most was his connection to a group that my wife had already identified from the markings. He wasn't acting alone. He was proving himself, trying to leave a mark, perhaps even being initiated. Hearing this made me angry. But my wife reminded me to stay focused. She explained that people like him thrive on reaction, on fear. The best way to shut it down was to expose it with evidence so airtight that no excuse could break it. And that's exactly what she prepared. She put together a full forensic report: photos, DNA evidence, shoe prints, video stills, analysis of the spray paint, and even the glove with fingerprints. She built the case from the ground up, and when she finally handed it all to the police, the reaction was immediate. They couldn't ignore it. The suspect was picked up within a week. But what shocked me most wasn't just that they caught him. It was his reason. When questioned, he admitted that the vandalism wasn't random. He had been told to target us specifically because, in his group's twisted logic, going after someone with ties to forensics was a way to make a name for himself. It was personal, not against me, but against my wife. Her reputation had preceded her, and in some warped way, they thought intimidating her would make them stronger. Hearing this made me realize how dangerous the situation had been all along, but it also filled me with pride. Because in the end, their plan had backfired spectacularly. They thought they were sending a message, but all they did was hand over enough evidence for my wife to dismantle their scheme entirely. That night, as we sat together, fence still scarred but spirits high, I told her, "They picked the wrong house." She smiled and corrected me. "No, they picked the wrong wife."